So welcome everybody. My name's Saul Becker. I'm Professor here and Head of the College of Social Sciences and the Pro-Vice Chancellor of the University. And it's my pleasure to welcome all of you to the conference, and especially those of you who are distinguished speakers, of course, but all of you who've travelled from some distance. So it's a pleasure to welcome you and to be able to do the opening address. To celebrate effectively the 30th anniversary marking the first summit between Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev, a meeting which, in retrospect, took the first steps in charting a path out of the Cold War. So I hope if you'll just bear with me if I talk for 5 or 10 minutes about some of the issues around that and what this conference is hoping to do. So the significance of the first meeting for Reagan can be seen in the fact that he opens his own memoirs with a short vignette about his face-to-face encounter with Gorbachev. The US president had believed for a while, as he wrote in the opening pages of the memoir, that if we were ever going to break down the barriers of mistrust that divided our countries, we had to begin by establishing a personal relationship between the leaders of the two most powerful nations on earth. Reagan then went on to say that as he shook hands and looked into Gorbachev's smile, the leader of a Soviet state, which only 2 years earlier he had called the evil empire, he sensed that he had been right and felt a surge of optimism that a breakthrough might be possible. This conference has been conceived and developed to reflect on that momentous moment in 20th century international relations and to consider how far the personal relationship that developed at Geneva and deepened at the summits that followed in Reykjavik, Washington, and Moscow contributed to the end of the Cold War. The potential for face-to-face diplomacy to build trust between adversaries is a key research area of the Institute for Conflict, Cooperation and Security here at the University of Birmingham. The ICCS, as we like to refer to it, is directed by Professor Nicholas Wheeler, who's the architect of today's event and who is in the final stages of writing a book on the role of interpersonal trust in transforming adversarial relationships. Nick has a number of research students and research fellows working in this area at the ICCS, as well as a wider international network, including Dr. Marcus Holmes from the University of William and Mary, who will speak later. And Nick and Marcus are collaborating on a major new research project in this area. And Marcus has a book under review with Cambridge University Press that builds on his own PhD thesis, which explores how the latest findings in neuroscience, particularly mirror neuron theory, opens up new ways of thinking about why face-to-face diplomacy appears to lead to diplomatic breakthroughs when other means of communication and interaction so often fail. Nick's to be congratulated for assembling such an authoritative group of academics and former diplomats to reflect on the significance of the meeting in Geneva. And in this, he's been supported by Dr. Derek Aver from the Center for Russian, European and Eurasian Studies at Birmingham, who's a leading authority on the Soviet and Russian military. I'm delighted that Ambassador Jack Matlock, who advised and accompanied Reagan at all the summits, Ambassador Adamashin, who was the Soviet Union's Deputy Foreign Minister from 1986 to 1990, and Sir Roderick Braithwaite, the UK's ambassador, first to the Soviet Union between 1998 and 1990, and then to the Russian Federation until 1992, are all with us to share their unique experiences and recollections at the highest levels of diplomacy and statecraft. And it's a particular delight that Sir Roderick Braithwaite is not only an honorary graduate of the university since 1998, but also an honorary professor here at the university. The event has been conceived in part as a historical retrospective on Geneva, and I'm very pleased that Dr. James Wilson, the State Department's historian of this period, and the author of the highly acclaimed The Triumph of Improvisation is with us. We're also very lucky to be joined by Professor Robert Service, who's followed up his wonderful biographies of Lenin, Stalin and Trotsky with his new book, The End of the Cold War, 1985 to 1991. And a recent review in The Guardian described that book as magisterial. Historical inquiry has a value, of course, all of its own, but the organisers of today's event are also guided by E.H. Carr's classic dictum that all history is contemporary history. We read and reinterpret the past through the prism of the present, and one of the most burning questions of the present is what can be done to rebuild trust in the relationship between Russia and the West, and crucially, what went wrong in the 1990s and early 2000s, such that the promise that Reagan glimpsed in Gorbachev's smile on that frosty November morning 30 years ago has not been realised in the intervening period. Instead, we have the arms control legacy that Reagan and Gorbachev put in place starting to unravel. The crisis over Ukraine and the resulting escalation of violence. The confrontational personal relationship between President Obama and President Putin. And most recently, Russian military aircraft flying combat missions in support of the Assad government in the inferno of violence and displacement that is modern-day Syria. And then, of course, we have Sinai and we have Paris. It will be fascinating to hear what Alexei Gromyko has to say on this from the Russian perspective, and Mary Dejevsky, who will offer her thoughts on one of our most respected commentators on Russia. The final part of the day will be a round table which will take the hardest question of all. What can be done to rebuild trust between Russia and the West? And what lessons might be drawn from the symmetry between Reagan and Gorbachev in this regard? We've a fantastic lineup for that final session, and I'm pleased that Dr. Ian Cairns is here from the European Leadership Network. This is not only because ICCS is developing a growing partnership with the ELN, which I encourage, but also because Ian has been at the forefront of efforts as director of ELN in identifying practical steps that might be taken by Russia and the West to de-escalate their growing conflicts. It's important that all perspectives are heard in this debate, and I'm also really pleased to welcome Thomas Forsberg, director of the Finnish Institute of International Affairs, to reflect on how trust might be built from the perspective of a state that prized its own neutrality during the Cold War. It's a fascinating day, and I'm envious that I can't spend much of my time with you here today, as I have to go on other university duties. But before closing, I'd like to offer some more thanks. First and most importantly, to all of you, obviously, for taking the time to come here today and from your busy diaries. Secondly, I'd like to thank Nick for organising such a fascinating event, which is a logical outreach of the pioneering research that's taking place in the Institute on face-to-face diplomacy and trust building, and which reflects the university's commitment to ensuring that its research has an impact on key practitioner communities. We'll make all the presentations today available on social media, not the questions and answers part, but all the main presentations. And one of ICCS's PhD students, Anna Alexandru, will produce a rapporteur's report from today's discussions. As part of that outreach, Nick and his colleague Professor David H. Dunn, the head of the Department of Political Sciences and International Studies, has written a piece on the lessons of the Reagan-Gorbachev symmetry for how trust can be rebuilt in the relationships between Russia and the West, and this will be published tomorrow in The Conversation. As we all know, events of this kind don't organise themselves, and my third set of thanks are to Catherine Edwards, the ICCS's Institute Manager, and Catherine, as ever, has played a pivotal role in ensuring that this event has the hallmark of professionalism and smooth organisational efficiency that we have come to associate with ICCS. She's been ably supported in this by Jill Williams of the School of Government and Society's events team. And thanks also to PhD students Josh Baker and Scott Edwards, who've kindly volunteered to help out. Finally, I want to thank Nathan Johnson and the creative media team for videoing today's event and for taking photos. If you don't want to be in the photos, or if you shouldn't be here, please let them know so that you're not filmed. So, without further ado, welcome to the University of Birmingham. I'd now like to hand over to Nick, who will take you from here. It's a wonderful opportunity, and I hope very much that it's an enjoyable and fruitful day for all of you. So, welcome.